trying to teach something to the masses. He was no longer trying to conceal it. He was trying to reveal the secret of the Torah. One of the most famous stories of the Baal Shem Tov is that he had a vision in which he saw the Mashiach. And he asked the Mashiach, when is the Master going to come? And he says, when you spread my well springs to the outside. And there's a continuation of that story, but the main point is that the Baal Shem Tov and his students saw it as their task to bring Chassidus, which although based on Kabbalah, was not Kabbalah per se, because it emphasized in the Baal Shem Tov's times davening, for example, over learning. And then it emphasized in other schools the simple act of the Anashim Pshutim, of the simple people, again over learning. Or it emphasized Avos Yisrael, love of a fellow Jew. They didn't yet expand that totally to the whole world, but many people understood love of a fellow Jew to be love of a fellow Jew like you who is religious like you.
Yeah.
That's how it was popular. That was what was basically the way people interpreted it until then. That Avos Yisrael is part of Avos Torah, in a sense. You love the Jew because they represent God because they do mitzvahs. If they don't do mitzvahs, so then, until today, people come and say, I'm a guy. They don't say that because their mother and their father are not Jewish. They say that because they're told, if you don't act Jewish, you're not Jewish. Somebody's giving them this thing. So these are kind of some of the popular things. And then some of the Kabbalistic concepts that were made very accessible, that were made very concrete, through teachers, through stories, eventually through the writings of the Hasidic masters. And because of that, although Kabbalah was studied by the Hasidic masters, it wasn't necessarily studied by their followers. Mm-hmm. And in the Pshischa school, in particular, they didn't emphasize Kabbalah. They de-emphasized it because I mentioned before, they re-emphasized Gemara. And that not only did they re-emphasize Gemara over Kabbalah, they re-emphasized Gemara over almost all Hasidic texts. They said, you daven and you learn. What's the problem? Until today, see, I come from a Chabad background. So, of course, who are the people who Chabad has the biggest problem with? The Litvaks, because they don't study Chassidus at all, they don't this and that. But when it comes to the Polish Chassidim, they say, so they learn Kedushas Levi for, a couple minutes every day, and they learn on Shabbos a little Chassidus, but they don't sit every day and learn Chassidus. But this is coming, there's a reason for that. Because if you go into the Garish Shtibel, they're not necessarily sitting and learning every day for an hour of Chassidus. Even though I'm talking about the people who are learning, I'm not talking about the people who are not learning. They're learning mostly Gemara, they're learning mostly Shulchan Aruch. So they'll open up a Chassidus Sefer for half an hour. In the Chabad Yeshiva, they learn 3 or 4 hours of Chassidus every day.
In Chabad?
In Chabad.
Oh, they do?
Yes. Tanya is just the beginning. You learn Tanya when you're 13, 14 years old. Mm-hmm.
But you also learn like Kedushas Levi?
No.
So there's a particular.
It's just Chabad. Chabad Chassidus alone has like 300 books, 300 volumes. And like 80 of them from the last Chabad Shabbat, 80, 90 of them.
Okay. More coming out every day.
And more coming out every day. There's like, 4 a year coming out now. So.
We've got plenty of time.
Yeah, they're reformatting things, they're putting them in new configurations. They did print after his passing the Rishimot, his personal notes, and that was a many volume set, but they did have that. So that's in a sense why, and I'm going to show you texts where what he does is not just to bring back Kabbalah into Hasidus, but what he does is he explains the unique perspective that his grandfather and his father had, which is a semi kind of mild form of antinomianism, of the idea that there are times that you can go beyond the law based on an immediate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God. That the Shulchan Aruch, while being a wonderful thing and being the source of much of Judaism and the source of the soul of Joseph, that's rooted in the contraction of staying within the boundaries of the law, is not necessarily the only methodology of connecting to the Ribbono Shel Olam, to God. And that there is another way, which is knowing in the moment what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. And how to get to know what He wants is you got to be in a very deep relationship with Him, and you have to be, in the words of Bob Dylan, to live outside the law you have to be honest. You have to be honest with yourself. And he has a whole systematic way in the Meshuvah of how it is that you're supposed to assess, be mevarer, which is in this context to clarify your motives. Why are you really wanting this? Is it just your ego? Is it just your physical desire? Or is this really coming from a divine place? In other places he says that what things like kashrut is all about is it doesn't make a difference to God what we eat, but it makes a difference to us. Because most people who keep kosher, chances are they're going to feel the connection to God. And you could argue and say, I know a lot of people who keep kosher, they don't feel any connection. Well, over the long term, they're going to feel the connection. That's what he says. And however, what if somebody goes to a certain level where they're connected to God? Now, even if they don't eat kosher, the problem is that we're still living in a pre-Messianic world. And for the most part, most of the people that we live with are on the level of Yosef. They need to be within the law, to be within the framework. Because other people would just be fooling themselves and are not really on that level. So, for the most part, you have to hold yourself in and be within the law so that you can fit into society. However, you want to know if there's any exceptions?
No. I have one quick question. You could deal with it now or later. But it seems to me in the anti-legal, anti-elitist aspect, there are some political overtones. And, would I be wrong in thinking that?
There are some, and I'll show you some in his own lifetime of Gershon Henoch, how you see that played out in his embracing of two new concepts, two very old concepts that he wanted to renew. So we'll get to that later. What was I just saying before?
About Rabbi Gershon.
Oh, okay. Okay. So anyway, so a bunch of the things that Gershon Henoch is coming to do is coming to give. In Judaism, everybody who wants to be accepted needs to find sources. Needs to find a source for it. I had a very beautiful high holiday speech, but I didn't really ground it in the sources because it was a chiddush. It was a semi-new idea, and I had a couple sources for it, but because it was a pretty big idea, if I wanted this idea to be accepted, I would have to construct sources for this idea. Now you could say if the sources are already there, then it's not my idea. That would be part of what finding the sources would be to be that I'm putting forward something that existed that people may not have been totally aware of, on the one hand, but because people weren't aware of it, so it has my name on it. That's what a good Sefer is. A good Sefer, like the Baal Tanya writes in the beginning, from sofers and sfarim, from books and scribes, like from sages and other books.